right, good evening. It is Sunday night at the Gorilla House. Late afternoon, early evening. I want to talk a little bit about the recent passing of my uncle a few months back. He passed right in the middle of this big COVID pandemic scare. So, of course, anybody that passed in these current times, you're not going to have, it's very unlikely that you're going to have the type of service that you would have had if not but for this COVID bullshit. And this was my uncle Charles, who was my recently departed, or recently in my view, recently departed dad's brother, one of his brothers. There were three brothers in my dad's family. He had two brothers and himself and a sister, so there were four of them. So now my dad has passed, and his brother Charles has passed, who was known to us as Uncle Teddy growing up. It was his nickname. We called him Uncle Teddy. I didn't even know. I wouldn't even have known, except that I received in the mail a very thoughtful, very considerate packet here from my cousin, Chrissy. And she sent me a really nice card, handwritten card, and she sent me this leaflet copy of the service that was had for my Uncle Teddy, her father. And I am like really, really moved by her consideration and thoughtfulness in sending this to me, because it means a lot to me. It genuinely does. My formative years growing up were shaped by my dad. I went down a lot of rocky road by my own accord later, but all the good that is in me came from a really, really an excellent upbringing and rearing. And my dad had everything to do with that. There were other people who contributed as well, key players. My departed grandmother, for sure and certain, and my mom, who's still alive, and my brother. But my dad was a huge influence in my life, man. Huge influence. And I cheated myself and him out of what should have been a more mature, more evolved, more understanding relationship in later years. He knew how I felt about him. We had a telephone conversation some years back, and it was extremely touching, and he was uncommonly emotional, as far as he was really put his heart out there in the things that he shared with me, the words that he said. Yeah, and that was very comforting. So he knew how I felt, but actions speak louder than words. And later on in life, one of the main things is I would see him intermittently here and there at various functions that were connected enough to my brother that I would be there, and my dad would also be there. But we were both too stubborn to really approach the other one. We kind of buzzed around each other, but we really never sat down and had the eye-to-eye conversations that we should have had, should have been able to have. And the one big shock to me was when I saw that he had had a stroke at one point. This big, strong man had a stroke, and he was getting up in years now, and he was in a wheelchair. And man, I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to approach to break the ice after all this time, not really sitting down with him, eye to eye, talking. Because I just to see him in that condition, I didn't want it to come across like, oh, now I'm going to speak to him, out of pity or out of sympathy, which it wouldn't have been, but I didn't know how to proceed with seeing him in that condition. It was just a shock enough because he was the strongest man I ever knew, hardest working man I've ever known, ever witnessed, outstanding work ethic, outstanding family values, just an all-around really, really solid, good, completely reliable man. Yeah, from a different period. So my cousin sent me this, about my dad's brother, my uncle Teddy passing, and it just drives home the reality that as you get up in age, you will find out, if you don't already know this, as you continue to age and you're still here for God knows what purpose. God only knows why. Maybe you ask that occasionally, but nonetheless you're still here. And the longer you remain here, the more people you're going to see age and grow old and wither and pass. People that bore heavily influence upon you, maybe shaped your life, even if they didn't even know it, maybe they knew it, but they didn't understand exactly how much, because maybe a lot of it didn't seem to take various times through your demonstrative behaviors, but it did. And in the end, it comes full circle, and you become a much more evolved and better person, better version of yourself. And that's when their influence actually shows through, because that's where you learn it, the better parts of you. And my cousin Chrissy, who's long now happily married, family, she's a mom. I saw her at my dad's funeral. Hadn't seen her for I don't know how many years prior to that. I think the last time I saw her was at my brother's wedding, where I was best man. That was some time ago. My brother's been married a good while now, quite a while. Married his high school sweetheart, did all the right things, raised his family, true reflection of his father. Just a good, solid, reliable man with outstanding family values and morality. Good provider, just like his dad. So, my cousin mentions here, I guess, kind of rhetorically, that she queries as to if I remember who she is, and she describes a little bit. And yeah, that's kind of funny, because I have always had a crush on Chrissy, though we saw each other very sporadically over the years. When I was young, I liked her. I mean, I still like her, but I would say she's my favorite cousin, to say the least. But this is extremely thoughtful over. I very much appreciate it. And I think the takeaway here, and the whole point in this video, is just to tell you guys, man, that are younger than me and you don't know where I'm coming from, you haven't experienced enough loss yet in your life to understand. Maybe you don't really recognize the value in those people that you have, that are available to you, that are here remaining yet. They won't always be here. They won't always be here. If you happen to draw the longer straw and you're still here long enough, as you probably should be because you're younger than those folks in your life, you'll see them pass away one by one. They'll move on. They'll leave this realm, and you're not going to know when it's going to happen. It's not like you have a calendar with all these dates marked on it, how many more years or how many more weeks or how many more days or whatever you have with these people, or any one of them. So don't go through the hindsight 2020 reality. Treasure these people while they're here. Put yourself out there, make yourself vulnerable so that you're available. And if you're estranged from any of these people, man, and I still am, I'm still guilty of this today, even in light of what I've seen, experienced, and lived, and what I can bear testimony to as I have witnessed, as I continue to survive. Patch up these holes in your life and reattach these loose ends, and let these people know how important they are, how special they are, how invaluable that they are before they're gone. It's probably a good idea. And maybe make the time, carve out the time, invest the time to spend that time with some of these people and hang out with some of these people, because when they're gone, they are gone. All the things they brought to your life that later on you realize are just solid gold, and there's no one there with that type of influence anymore, and you long for the day when those morals and values were instilled in you by these people, and you see the value now in them. See the value today while they're still here, and share that with them. And not only will that be gone away one day with them, other than the echoes of what remains in you, but so too will be a vast amount of life experience and history. Don't forget about that. Life experience and history. I'd give just about anything to have video of just a conversation with my dad, man. Talking about anything he wanted to talk about. Talking about his childhood, talking about his influences, talking about his life. And the same goes with my grandmother. Just invaluable knowledge and information that will be lost to the world. And certainly lost in your world, and lost to you. Other than what you can recall. And as you age, you'll slowly lose a good bit of that. So, just a word to the wise. That's all. One other brief notation that I neglected to include and intended to was, when my dad passed, of course I was nowhere around. I had no right to have any say, but nobody knows except for me, those that weren't there, those that didn't live with us day in and day out, how he brought me up and what I owe that man, and how intense and heavy his influence was and still is in my person. How poorly I may reflect that at times doesn't mean it isn't present. Doesn't mean I don't know better, and he's pretty much a lot of why I know better as a man. But when he passed, these little death cards, they're remembrance cards that they have, and they have usually some scripture or favorite poem, something like that on one side, maybe a little history about the deceased, birth date, death date, and that's what it is, right? And then on the flip side, usually it has a picture of that person, or has a picture of the person up in the corner or whatever. And the one thing is that I is when my dad passed, whoever decided, other people that were closer to him, other people that earned their position in that right later in his life and were with him to the end, they elected to use a photograph of him in his older age. Maybe that's what they knew of him. Maybe that's how they knew him. And like I've said many times before, history matters, man. History counts in your life, and those around you, they're important. And that's why I personally don't feel people are just so easily disposable. I don't feel that relationships should be, as they are much today, so easily disposed. And I think that, in older times and earlier eras, when people stuck it out, man, and they went through whatever they went through, but they went through it together, and they came out and they did whatever it involved or required to make it happen and make it work, to try, to not quit on each other, but to try. I think that says volumes, speaks volumes. And in the end, as we all wither and get old and fragile, which will happen to every single one of us, if we live long enough, if we don't die early, wouldn't it be nice to be able to have coffee or to sit on the porch in the rocker, or just across the table from someone that knew you and that you've known and that you've lived some life with, and you have that history. And even though in your eyes, in relative comparison, you may not be shit anymore, physically, but that person remembers when you were. That person was there and witnessed that, and likewise, you were there with them. You share that common history, and that's probably awful sweet. And there are people that will have that, but not in as great numbers as once it was. So I think that it just seemed so fitting to me, and just such a really good decision or choice or omen or whatever, that when my Uncle Teddy passed, that they elected to put a picture of him when he was sharp and he was young and he was dressed fine and he was well groomed, and it was a portrait obviously that was taken some point in his life when he was young and vibrant and strong, and in every way the best of himself, is physically anyway, right? I think that's how I would prefer to be remembered, and that's certainly how I would prefer to remember my dad. So, if nothing else, maybe let it be known that if you feel that way yourself, when you go, man, or when I go, don't put some pictures of me up. Don't post some 8x10 in front of my coffin. Yeah, I know it's a casket, right? You put vampires in coffins, but I'm going to be in a coffin, bro, and it's all right with me. But I would prefer if you don't stick some picture of me up on there as a wrinkled up, pruned out, old, dried up, fragile, faded version of what I used to be. Put a picture up there for people to remember and pay tribute to those few who may, of when I was strong, and when I was capable, and when I was viable, and when I was vibrant and full of life. Just a thought.